We're talking health tech, and we heard from ProMake earlier, who I think sort of blew everyone's minds a little bit with some of their work. But through the sort of pandemic, what we've now started to be exposed to is actually that influx of technology in our day-to-day lives. You know, we're talking about the COVID-19 track and trace app. We're talking about the apps where we can now get the COVID-19 passport. We're accessing our GP appointments online. So we were really interested to sort of understand a bit more about that and how those businesses are accessing those contracts and opportunities. So I'm really pleased to welcome Annabelle from Addleshaw Goddard, who we're just going to explore that a bit further with. So Annabelle, if you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your role and your speciality at Addleshaw Goddard.
Of course. So I'm a technology and privacy lawyer, and I spend my time advising businesses on, exactly as you said, all of those new technologies that are being brought in various different circumstances. Obviously the pandemic being a huge catalyzer for that. And I tend to focus on the contracting side of new innovations and new technologies being brought in, and also the use of data as well in a privacy compliant way, and to help organizations utilize and maximize the benefit, both monetary and societal benefits as well, from data and from all the data that technologies do collect these days.
Brilliant. And I think it feels like, you know, there's so much that's moved so quickly, that acceleration in the last 18 months, you know, feels like it's a huge kind of step forward. But is that the reality for your clients and the businesses that you're working with? Is it moving at that pace, or are we sort of, you know, what's that reality and what's that landscape like at the moment?
It really, really has. I mean, I think there was a pause right at the beginning of the pandemic when no one was really sure what was going on. Things were almost kind of dropped a little bit. And then everyone realized, actually, in many ways, life does need to go on as normal. And there are so many different services and products that we use on a daily basis that we have to be able to still access, such as you mentioned earlier, GP surgeries. And overnight, GP surgeries had to suddenly, in some way, carry on connecting with all of their, you know, tens of thousands of registered patients in a way that they just had never done before. So I think upscaling and being able to roll out things like that overnight was just a huge challenge for many organizations. And many of our clients found themselves in a position then where they could kind of almost step into that gap and say, well, we have a product here that we've been developing that we actually think would be perfect for this situation. And it did sometimes, in some circumstances, mean that procurement that's usually very complex for organizations didn't kind of necessarily always go according to plan, but it's been a great opportunity for a lot of our clients. And they've been bringing lots of really exciting products and services to market.
Wonderful. And is there anything that you've sort of been involved with in the past 18 months that you know, kind of client or a business where you've just thought that was absolutely like incredible to see how they've switched and adapted, you know, to the situation?
Yeah, I mean, there's been many, but I think, I mean, one that really does stick out in my mind, and it's kind of, I mean, this client works with technology in a way that's perhaps kind of more broad way. So often when I think of technology, I think of, you know, wearables in the health tech context, so, you know, devices that we wear on our wrists, for example. But this client was working with testing. So originally it was testing for a whole variety of purposes and supplying lots of NHS trusts with those services, testing of blood test samples, but also others. And they realized overnight that wasn't going to continue. So they suddenly had all of this testing capability, but nothing to test. So they thought, right, well, this is an opportunity for us to pivot, to do something different, to step into that gap. And it was an opportunity for them to really do their bit in the pandemic as well. So they, overnight, were able to provide facilities for COVID testing. And, you know, it meant for them that it demonstrated that they were able to diversify, to do that pivoting, which was a great opportunity for them. And they've now kind of gradually been able to go back to a more kind of hybrid, doing both types, both business as usual and the exceptional COVID testing as well.
I love these exciting stories of how people have shifted during this period. And, you know, the sort of long-standing thing of sort of the health tech sector, I suppose, is it's such a challenge to you know, make that business work and how you access contracts and you know, sort of navigate the beast that is the NHS sort of system. So we're sort of saying that things have accelerated, but what are the kind of some of the challenges and barriers that we're still seeing for businesses in that space?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, traditionally in particular, organisations have found NHS procurement just a labyrinth and almost so unnavigable that they've almost just thought, right, we're going to have to go down a different route. But obviously in the UK, the NHS is the organisation that you want to be providing services to. So I think, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, during the pandemic, there has been a little bit of a shift in terms of how procurement works, and there's been a few examples of shortcuts being taken. I think we're probably going to see going back to normal rules. But I think in terms of preparing for that process, when an organisation has a product or a service that they want to be able to sell into the NHS, it's a matter of being as prepared as possible. So yes, there's a myriad of forms that need to be filled out and information that needs to be presented, but it is possible to find out in advance what that looks like. So there's a huge amount of information on the internet about it. There's various services available to kind of help with that process. And it's about just being prepared. So where I often come from with this is the privacy and data protection context. Yeah. So how are you going to use your data? What have you done to make sure that individuals' rights are protected in terms of their medical records, for example? And often my clients will find themselves in a position where they're having those conversations with the NHS and they can't necessarily yet answer the questions that are being posed to them. So being really prepared to explain how all of that's been thought through beforehand and that you're doing things in a compliant way, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And so with all the sort of acceleration of innovation and we've seen so much already, what's next? What are we going to see kind of, in terms of trends in the next kind of 12 months, 2 years, 5 years, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, if you'd asked us that question 2 years ago,
imagine.
Who would have known? But I think we're going to see this trend continue in the sense of health services and products, just the use of them escalating. I don't think we won't go back to where we were before. So people have been using technology to manage their own health as well in a way that just wasn't the case previously. I mentioned wearables earlier, but mental health apps, for example, people have, the use of those have just skyrocketed. And I think that will continue. And with the kind of increased privatization in the NHS as well, there will be just more and more opportunity for companies to be able to sell products and services in this arena, whether it be to the NHS or privately or directly to consumers, directly to patients. So I think we'll definitely see a huge trend continuing. And I think, as I mentioned, mental health is going to be a really big focus. And also that self-care as well. So giving consumers and patients the tools that they need in order to manage their care themselves. So whether they have long-term conditions, being able to kind of enable them to manage that going forwards, rather than being potentially as reliant as previously on kind of official health channels.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you again to Addleshaw Goddard for supporting and sponsoring today. We really appreciate that, to be able to make this kind of happen. And I think we know that there's so much that's happening, and I think we see this adoption of technology and that access is incredible, and I think it's now about that communication piece. I think when we were sort of chatting before today that what's really happening behind the scenes and what's going on with our data, and I think it's how people then communicate that and look into that and have access to that information. So thank you again.
Absolutely. No problem.
Next up, we're going to hear from our friends over at the Manchester Fuel Cell Innovation Centre. Now, would it be an Elevate event if we didn't hear from Amma and the team over at MMU? I don't think it would. So we're going to watch that next.